So, first things first, Yola, how are you?
Good, thank you.
That's very good to hear. So, before we get into your album and what you've been up to lately, I'd like to jump back to the beginning. Do you?
Oh, beginning? Which beginning?
What beginning?
There have been many.
Well, your musical beginning. Let's put it that way.
Okay, yes.
So, do you remember when you kind of realized you had more of a connection with music than maybe the people around you?
I think probably about age 4. I don't really have a memory of not singing, but I think like my identity as a person that was going to sing, that was going to write songs, that was going to perform, was always like something that I kind of was like an epiphany. And it was an epiphany at that particular moment. I was probably 4.5, and I went up to my mother and I said, I'm going to sing and I'm going to write songs. That's going to be my job. And I told her that she goes, well, it's not really something that is a realistic thing. And I was like, no, that's what I'm going to do. And I remember talking to people about it, like people at school and, other kids, and saying, they go, well, would you be in a band? Would you be a solo artist? And actually, I remember always saying that I'd be a solo artist because I feel like I want to find out what I want to do. And so I think I knew I wanted to sing and write songs. And then maybe from about age 7, I knew that I wanted to be a solo artist, and I wanted to kind of maybe find my voice, because it felt as though the thing that I wanted to do wasn't necessarily around me. So I didn't have exposure to it, but my voice sounded different and I didn't know why. So it was very confusing.
Well, that's an interesting point, exposure, because I did read you went into your mother's record collection a little bit.
Yes, in a big way.
What did you find, and what did you kind of didn't find? What were you lacking in that?
Yes, and no one's ever asked that. Thanks. So what I did find is that I found a lot of Aretha and Elton John and Bee Gees, and I found what else did we listen to? She had a Staples Singers record. I think I found Dolly in that scenario as well. And so it was, and I found Freddie Mercury and some early Queen in that situation as well. And so I think, and my mum was and she was really into Shania Twain as well. I think I listened to a lot of the old Shanae.
Okay.
Yeah, and so in her record collection, it was mostly kind of British crossovers and kind of American country and soul music, And so, especially with the kind of Elton thing, Elton really spoke to me, Dolly really spoke to me. This kind of traditional songwriter setup, be it guitar or piano, was really it felt really close to home. And then listening to Aretha, obviously, another kind of songwriter, piano player, kind of that kind of visage of, expressing yourself, creating something, going into yourself was it was really fascinating to me. It was also maybe a little bit intimidating, the idea of doing all of that workload, but the singing came so naturally. I thought I'd just find myself eventually,
And then in terms of what you were lacking, because you mentioned your voice was different.
Yes.
So what did you have to discover by yourself? What kind of music?
I think all the linking things I had to find myself. And so my mum had a Staples Singers record, but it's worth noting, she didn't let me touch it at all. And so Mavis played a really big part in me understanding a certain aspect of my voice. Not all of it by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly a certain aspect. And the kind of musical linkage of gospel, southern soul music and folk, American folk, and country, you know? And so that kind of grey area where all of that mixed became kind of clearer to me. And I suppose so I searched for people of colour's incarnations of that, you know, and I think I was also looking for things that were maybe kind of ambiguous in genre or maybe more on the classic pop side. And so I think and maybe folk as well. And so I think I got into Joni and I got into a lot of the Laurel Canyon stuff kind of outside of that realm because there was something. I also got into a lot of Kinks and a lot of kind of British pop stuff around that era. Again, all with the kind of smell of hippie somewhere, you know. But I was searching for this kind of hippie-ish aesthetic, this something. That was something that I needed because it felt as though, like, on a harmony level, like, there was a little bit of that aesthetic in my melody kind of choices from a very young age, certainly from, like early teens, like, when I'd kind of ad-lib, there'd be a little bit of a kind of country run, a little bit of a kind of hippie folksy run, a little bit of a soul run kind of thing. And they all kind of mixed together quite a lot. And so, like, I had to go and find where all that stuff mixed, you know, which wasn't always straightforward, you know.
Well, I can imagine because then you're from Bristol, is kind of the hometown of Tricky, Portis, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So your peers probably didn't listen to the same music.
Well, Bristol's very eclectic, surprisingly. I think it's just one of those things where the things that were famous that came out of there were kind of electronic music based. And so there was a lot of people who, by and large, made electronic music. But at no point does anyone think that everyone in Liverpool only makes music like the Beatles.
Sure.
Or that everyone from Manchester only makes music like Oasis.
Sure.
But Bristol, for some crazy reason, maybe because they dubbed it the Bristol sound, people all of a sudden think there must be nothing else there but electronic music. And it's popular there, but there were people as well who were into, you know, all sorts of music. Country music, soul music, jazz music, you know, funk music. And so the thing that we benefited from in that city is that it's quite mixed in. And so people tend to have quite mixed friendship groups. And so your exposure to Afrobeat or, soul music or folk, you could be a musician and play all of those genres and understand the things they have in common and the things they don't. And so Bristol was almost a better place to look for the linkages in music than anywhere else, America included. I think in a weird way, what I've found is that because they create this stuff, they understand they put it all into these boxes of, I understand that Americana is Americana and country is country, and they look at they can see all the detail, and they're very much like, no, this is this, and they keep it very separate. Whereas we lump it together and we look for the common ground. Maybe because we've got that distance across the water to kind of look at it, you know, and go, well, we can see that. That's different. Okay, fair enough. And, you know, but we see it in a different way. Right. And so it's my Britishness that makes me look at music like this and made it essential for this record to happen, you know? I don't think I could have vocally interpreted it in the same way if I was born in the States.
Because otherwise it might be too much of a copy in a sense, or...
Yeah, or I would have just been very much a kind of soul vocal over kind of a country background type thing or something. And my voice has way more in it than that because it's not so kind of separated out, you know? And, you know, it's not even a matter of right or wrong. Like, the great thing about working with an American producer is that we get the best of both points of view.
Sure. And
so it's just been really great kind of being in that environment in the States and bringing the kind of European point of view, sensibility to Nashville, you know. It's valuable. And I think it's the very core of the kind of British-American conversation that's been going on for music since forever.
Sure.
You know, like that's been what's made it work. And, you know,
Well, you saw
us Brits are we're trying to keep it going, you know?
Well, you saw what happened with Jimi Hendrix is a good example.
Yes!
I mean, he wasn't appreciated in America. He went to England, they liked him, then he came back to America and it worked. So
Exactamente.
that kind of stuff, yeah. Happens all the
Exactly.
time.
And it's also that conversation, he was quoting a lot of blues stuff, but he had, and like, came from that background, you know, and like he just kind of, he'd visit places and pick things up on the way. And I think it's that relationship, it's the traveling, it's the collaborating with people from both sides of the pond that makes it really interesting, or being in that environment, you know, and soaking up some stuff in that environment can make you have a more interesting outlook I just think that's the joy of being in a world that feels a little smaller today, you know. You know, we can do that easier, and we should, you know.
There's one more thing I want to ask about kind of before your whole album and everything, which is, well, you mentioned your mother didn't want you to become a musician.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
You've talked about this before, but and over the years it hasn't been easy to get this kind of dream, but you were, your mind was made up, I think. So what kept you going all those years? Because it is a difficult business, I suppose, to get into.
Yeah, like I think what kept me going was ideas. Like my head was swimming with ideas all the time, and I'd try and ignore it, and like just there were so many ideas, and I felt as though I'd listen to like music that was going on, and I'd be like, I feel like I've got something to contribute. You know, I think I've got something to say. And I think the day I stop having something to say, I'll just stop doing music, because I got great grades, I can do anything. Some people in music, they're like, oh crap, I got real bad grades, so I have to do music, or, you know, this is the only place I felt at home. No, I'm absolutely fine. Like, I honestly just want to.
Well, I was going to say.
I just want to. And I'm one of these people that, like, if you can get me doing exactly what I want to do, I'll excel, you know, and I can really become quite kind of oddly withdrawn and introverted if I'm doing what I don't want to do. Which for a person that's naturally extra, it feels like very dramatic. But like, that's, you know, when I want to do something, I put everything into it, because otherwise it's a life full of regret, right? You know, well, if I couldn't find a way to do it in the way I wanted, I would have quit it.
Yeah. Well, this is I might be off here, but I read somewhere that you kind of said about the album Walk Through Fire that a lot of the songs, it feels like you're saying goodbye to people, but you were saying goodbye to yourself. Is that kind of what you mentioned now? Like, you were able to, in the last couple of years, be more of yourself in a way. Yes,
very much so. I really feel that, I think I call it the 29 panic. That's a period of your life, it doesn't have to be 29 exactly, where it dawns on you that the lot that you made for yourself, kind of 19 onwards, end of high school onwards, just wasn't tenable anymore, that you'd grown up somewhat, and you've got these things called boundaries, you've got this other stuff called self-respect, and, you know, and maybe even the beginnings, not the entirety, of a self-esteem, you know. And all of these things can then change your outlook, but also change the things that you think are acceptable in the way that you're treated, in the environment that you're in, you know, in the way that you want to express yourself, because maybe you dare to do things outside of your little box that you've been allotted, you know. And so that I'm very much in this record saying goodbye to the little box Yola, the kind of maybe all of this that you're seeing now in the extraness and all the expression on the front, but then super terrified behind. That terrifying behind Yola, I'm saying goodbye to her too. And so, like, yeah, there are a lot of these things that we all in life grow out of. And this record is for that stage in anyone's life. That's what it is.
And I'm going to be selfish here and pick out my favorite song from the record
Do it.
to talk about it. So It Ain't Easier is my favorite.
Yes! That always makes me so excited when people say that.
How come?
Because it's the only one I wrote on my own.
Okay.
Yeah. I wrote it
When
before
did
I
you
met
write it?
Dan.
Yeah, well, because I saw a live version on YouTube. I think you were playing it.
Yes.
So when did you write it? And do you remember kind of that?
God, okay. I'm going to go back into the memory banks here. Okay. So, a friend of mine, drummer and producer and wonderful singer called Harry Harding, me and him went to have like a bit of a chill out post-Americana fest in 2017. And I've been doing a lot of shows. It was pretty non-stop. And I had a lot of meetings as well, because obviously I was meeting just a lot of my team that we then went on to do the record with, but I hadn't met anyone yet. So I went to this ranch kind of Airbnb let thing and like decided to just like write some songs and sit on the porch in a hammock and chill, make food, you know. And so, yeah, at some point we were at the end of the day and all the mosquitoes were coming out. I was like, we need to get the hell in now. And so I was just going upstairs to kind of like, you know, maybe put my guitar away or something. And like, at the moment, I just had a thought of a song. And as I was coming back down the stairs, the song started revealing itself to me. So I got to the bottom of the stairs, I kind of took my guitar back down and turned on my phone and then just started singing the chorus part. That's kind of, it didn't come in order, it kind of came chorus and the verse part came after. And probably within about the space of 5 minutes, the song was done. Wow. And I was like, Harry, quick, it's coming. Yeah. And so it just kind of happened like that. And he was like, oh, that was quick. He just kind of came around the corner. I think he was in the living room. Came around the corner and goes, oh, that was quick. I'm like, yeah, I just had like we've been writing all day, like loads of stuff. And like, that was just like a really quick one that came out. And that was the one that stuck for when I was thinking about this record. I was like, this is where we need to go. And sometimes the immediate ones have
that's
this sense of urgency. Yeah.
They say that with a lot of those. Elton John is a good example. I think he wrote Your Song in about 25 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Those kind of brilliant nuggets that float down in some way.
And it's like you can be so much more elegant with the kind of, I suppose, midbrain and memory banks more than you can with your prefrontal cortex and trying to muscle it, you know. And I know a lot of people do muscle it, but I think there's a lot of elegance in what you can stitch together that bumps into each other at the back of your mind, you know. And so that's been a really big part of what I've been trying to kind of get to when I'm writing, is to that flow state, you know, to kind of be in that state where I'm not really thinking, things are just bumping into each other and I'm just pulling them down into kind of the kind of conscious mind, you know. And so that's how that happened. And like, yeah, it's not the easiest situation to get into. Well, when you're very comfortable, it comes quicker.
But in that sense then, is it easier now? Because I can imagine that there's a lot of stuff going on around you now as well. Because a lot of things are moving. So is that a distraction, or like you say, are you more comfortable?
Well, I'm just more comfortable in myself now. Okay. That helps. Every year that goes on, I'm getting more and more comfortable with myself. Those things help. But for me, it's my company. I'm fed, but people feed me as much as food and money to pay my rent. Sure. You know, like currency to me is people. And if I'm in an environment that makes me feel comfortable, that makes me feel massively unjudged, and just like in communication, like we're into the same stuff, and there's a fair amount of crossover, and so I feel as though when I say something, someone's going to make a really great kind of elaboration. Just that, like if I'm collaborating, that's a really wonderful environment. Even if I'm not collaborating, having a sounding board, someone that I'm it's always kind of the presence of people helps me develop ideas in some way, even when I'm writing alone.
With that in mind then, because I've spoken to Dan Auerbach as well, and I remember him saying that he would love to just be at home and work in the studio and work with people. He doesn't like the road too much. So what was it like then being in that studio, being in that environment, and not just him, but all those different kinds of musicians?
Yes.
What was it like to be in that creative space?
Well, the first thing was that, I remember when I've talked to people about this, and there's a lot of this thought of, that all the musicians were in there all day, every day, which they weren't. So we did like writing days where it was just the songwriting aspect with the writers, and then the tracking days as you'd expect with the band and everything, and going into that process. And so, like, by and large, it was kind of maybe a more chill environment than you'd expect from having the hubbub of a full studio all day, every day, And so writing was very like, meet somebody, have a little talk, get into some writing, like figure out where you want to go through that talk, kind of the process of, like, anytime you go into a co-write, you are kind of figuring out, what the story is,
Sure.
where you understand each other. And I think it's very easy to go and search for songwriters based on their acclaim alone. But the most important thing is to get the writer who can get into the head of the artist to the point where you feel like you're getting a truer story, And so part of the conversation and the hang or the, that moment, regardless of how swift it is that moment of connection where you feel like you can talk. And then there's some level of understanding. Then through that, you get to some salient point. And that salient point might be talking about being in a house fire. It might be about saying goodbye to a certain part of yourself. It might be about kind of being uplifted by love in your life as it is, as I am right now with my awesome ass band that you're going to be listening to later. Like, in so many different ways, I'm uplifted by those guys.
Right.
Not just in a playing live way, but like, if I've needed somewhere to stay, they've had my back. If, all of these things, they come out in the conversations that we had, and that led to the songs. And
And that's the album.
Yeah, that's the album. That's how it happened. And, the deeper these connections get, the more, you're able to find things that are meaningful.
On that note, thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.